Imagine yourself settling into a quiet, comfortable space, the kind where the soft hum of nighttime gently wraps around you like a warm blanket. Welcome back to the channel, or welcome for the very first time. I'm the Sleepy Historian, and tonight we drift together into another calm and steady journey through the past. The kind of boring history for sleep that helps your mind untangle. The kind of soft-spoken history documentary that feels almost like a whisper from another age. If this slow, soothing style of bedtime relaxation and soft storytelling truly helps you rest, you're more than welcome to like the video and subscribe. But please, only if it actually brings you peace. And if you feel comfortable, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is out there, drifting off to the same gentle rhythm of old stories. Whether you are a lover of calm bedtime storytelling, someone who enjoys relaxing history to fall asleep to, or simply a listener who finds comfort in the steady pacing of the past, I'm glad you're here. Tonight's journey carries us far from the noise of modern life and into the stark quiet of the American frontier. Our theme is how frontier women survived winter alone on the homestead. And like every night, we will travel through 4 slow, carefully drawn segments, moving from daily life to biography, from subtle mysteries of culture and landscape, and finally toward the social contrast that shaped frontier existence. As always, our pacing will be measured, our details gentle, our tone soft enough to let your thoughts drift like snow across an empty plain. So settle in, feel the weight leave your shoulders. Let the soft glow of your screen fade into the background. Let the wind of a distant prairie whistle faintly in your imagination. Let the quiet routines of forgotten homesteads soothe you. Dim the lights. Let the past whisper. Let the coldest winters unfold in gentle, sleepy detail. And let's begin. Imagine yourself waking before dawn on a frontier homestead, long before the world outside has stirred. Winter holds everything in its quiet grip. The air is still, the sky a muted charcoal gray, and the land seems wrapped in a soft blanket of snow that has settled through the night. In the cabin, the darkness is gentle rather than deep, touched by the faint glow of embers resting in the stove. These early moments, when the world is half asleep, reveal the true rhythm of life for women who lived alone on the homestead during the colder months. The first sound is often the quiet shifting of wood, expanding slightly as the temperature inside rises. A frontier woman would move slowly at first, letting her mind and body adjust to the cold that lingers even indoors. She would bundle herself in wool layers, each one carrying the faint scent of smoke, earth, and hard work. There is no rush in her movements, only a steady acceptance of the tasks that begin every winter morning. She understands that survival comes not from urgency, but from consistency, from small, careful actions performed day after day. To start the day, she kneels by the stove, coaxing life back into the embers that smoldered through the night. The dry bark she adds crackles softly, releasing a familiar aroma, a comforting blend of cedar and the subtle dampness of old logs stored at the edge of the cabin. As the fire grows, a soft warmth expands outward, pushing back the cold that clings to the cabin walls. She moves slowly, not because she is idle, but because winter teaches a different pace, a deliberate, measured rhythm that stretches the day and encourages calm endurance. Once the fire is revived, she prepares a simple breakfast. Maybe it is cornmeal porridge simmered slowly over the warm stove, its scent mingling with the sharper smell of burning wood. Or perhaps it is bread left to rise near the fire overnight, now placed on a cast iron skillet to bake. Every sound, the soft scrape of a wooden spoon, the gentle tap of tin cups on the table, blends with the soft hum of the winter morning. For a frontier woman living alone, even the smallest domestic noises become companions in the quiet months. Stepping outside, she is met with a world muted by snow. The homestead looks almost like a sketch drawn in pale ink. A cabin with simple lines, a small barn set slightly askew, a fence partly buried beneath drifts. Each breath forms a faint cloud in the cold air. disappearing almost as quickly as it appears. The snow crunches softly under her boots, a texture that is both delicate and reassuring. Even in the harshest season, there is something peaceful about the space between the cabin and the barn, where silence settles softly on every surface. Her chores begin with checking the animals. The barn, though drafty, offers the shelter necessary for both livestock and human resilience. She moves between the stalls, her hands brushing against the rough wooden beams. The animals greet her with quiet, warm breaths, reminders of life and responsibility in the frozen months. She clears frozen water, refills feed troughs, and checks each creature with a practiced eye. This routine is less about efficiency and more about presence, the simple comfort of caring for something that depends on her. On some mornings, she pauses just inside the barn door. Through the small opening, she can see the first hints of daylight spreading across the horizon. It arrives slowly, as though respecting the stillness of winter. Pale blues shift into muted golds, casting soft light over the snow-covered landscape. The distant trees stand tall against the sky, their branches etched with frost. In these moments, there is no sense of urgency, no need to hurry. Winter teaches patience by its very nature, and a woman on the frontier often absorbs this lesson deeply. Returning to the cabin, she carries with her a sense of quiet accomplishment. Small tasks completed, small rhythms maintained. The morning unfolds not with the rush of modern life, but with a gentle, steady flow, a reassurance that progress in winter is measured not in grand achievements, but in simple continuance. She tends to the fire again, adjusts a pot of simmering beans, or mends a torn mitten by the window. All of these tasks are part of the quiet pattern of winter survival, creating a sense of order within an unpredictable landscape. The hours pass slowly, marked by the subtle shift of light outside and the calm repetition of familiar chores. In these early parts of the day, she is not fighting winter, she is moving with it. There is a comfort in the stillness, a soft acceptance that life here requires both strength and gentleness. The winter morning on a frontier homestead is not defined by dramatic events or sudden challenges. Instead, it is formed by the soothing cadence of routine, a rhythm that keeps her grounded through the long, cold season. As the pale winter morning gradually settles into the muted light of midday, the rhythm of life on the frontier shifts just slightly. It does not become faster, nor does it grow more demanding in tone. Rather, it expands into a series of steady tasks that must be tended to, each one weaving quietly into the next. For a frontier woman living alone on her homestead, the long winter day becomes a tapestry of small, necessary actions, each performed with a gentle patience shaped by experience. The cabin itself is both shelter and partner in survival. Throughout the day, she listens to its subtle language. The faint groan of timber contracting in the cold, the soft flutter of wind sneaking through tiny gaps between logs, the whisper of snow sliding gently from the roof. These sounds are familiar, almost comforting, reminders that she is not truly isolated, but surrounded by a structure that responds to the season just as she does. When the fire dims, she feeds it. When drafts grow bold, she presses woven rugs or spare cloth against the crevices. Her movements are calm, methodical, and rooted in the understanding that frontiers depend not on force, but on quiet persistence. Midday chores often revolve around food, preserving it, preparing it, or stretching what remains in the pantry. Winter demands planning, and the shelves inside her cabin reflect the careful thought she put into the harvest months. Glass jars of dried beans, burlap sacks of flour and cornmeal, small bundles of herbs tied with faded string, and root vegetables stored in the cellar all reveal her steady work from the previous seasons. She knows precisely how much can be used each day without threatening the weeks ahead. Survival on the homestead is a balance between necessity and restraint, and every choice she makes shows that she understands this balance deeply. Today, perhaps she prepares a simple stew. The ingredients might be modest: potatoes, onions, dried peas, a pinch of salt, but the act of cooking itself becomes a gentle ritual. She listens to the soft bubbling of the pot, watches the steam climb slowly into the air, and breathes in the warm comfort of a meal that promises nourishment. Sometimes she hums softly, not a song of joy or sorrow, but a repetitive, soothing melody that helps pass the quiet hours. When the stew simmers, she uses the time to mend clothing or repair tools. Sitting near the window, she lets what little daylight there is fall softly across her lap. The thread glides through fabric with a faint whisper, creating neat lines of reinforcement on worn seams. A frontier woman often becomes her own tailor, carpenter, and caretaker. A torn glove is more than an inconvenience. In winter, it is a vulnerability. Yet she approaches these repairs calmly, understanding that each stitch is another step towards security and comfort. The snow outside thickens as midday drifts into afternoon. Through the window, she can see the slow descent of flakes, each one small, steady, and unhurried. The world seems to move at the same gentle pace as her breath. There is beauty in the simplicity, the smooth white of the ground, the faint outline of distant trees, the soft shadows cast by clouds drifting above the prairie. Winter may be harsh, but it also settles the world into a quiet stillness that feels almost meditative. Later in the day, she steps outside to gather more firewood. This task, though physically demanding, becomes an opportunity to immerse herself in the peaceful sounds of nature. The snow crunches beneath her boots in a steady rhythm. The logs, stacked neatly beside the cabin, bear the crisp scent of cold pine. She selects a few pieces, balancing them against her hip before returning inside. When she sets them by the stove, the faint thud of wood against the floor feels like a punctuation mark in the quiet narrative of her day. Before the early winter dusk arrives, she tends once more to the animals. Their movements are slower now, conserving energy in the cold. She checks their water, refills the hay, and brushes frost from their coats. There's a calm intimacy to these moments, a recognition that both she and the animals rely on one another, sharing warmth, routine, and survival. The barn becomes a sanctuary of gentle sounds. The quiet munching of hay, the soft shifting of hooves, the faint jingle of a loose latch. Back inside the cabin, the afternoon gives way to evening. The fire glows brighter now, reflecting warmly against the wooden walls. She stirs the stew, lifts the lid to let steam rise, and sets a bowl on the table. Dinner is simple, but the warmth spreads through her body, offering comfort after a day spent in motion. The cabin smells faintly of smoke, cooked vegetables, and wool warmed by the fire, scents that become part of the homestead's identity during winter. As twilight deepens, she takes a moment to rest. Sitting by the fire, she watches the flames dance slowly, their movement steady and hypnotic. Outside, the world darkens into quiet obscurity. The long winter day draws to a soft close, not with abruptness, but with a gentle easing that mirrors her own quiet endurance. The tasks of the day, cooking, mending, gathering wood, tending animals, may seem small from the outside, but together they form a calm, continuous thread that holds the fabric of her life in place. As evening settles over the frontier, the winter landscape undergoes a subtle but profound transformation. The pale daylight, which never grows fully bright during these cold months, slowly dims into a soft indigo that stretches across the plains. For a frontier woman living alone, nightfall is not an event to fear or rush through. It is a familiar turning of the day's wheel, a gentle invitation to withdraw into warmth, reflection, and measured preparation for the long hours ahead. Inside the cabin, the fire becomes the heart of the evening. Its soft glow flickers gently against the wooden walls, creating shifting patterns that move as slowly as her own breath. She adds wood with practiced care, listening for the small crackle that signals the logs have caught. With each piece, the warmth spreads outward, wrapping itself around the simple furnishings, the rough-hewn table, the hand-stitched quilt laid neatly across the bed, the small shelf lined with jars, tools, and the few treasured items she brought with her to the frontier. Night is the time when silence deepens, settling into the corners of the room like a familiar visitor. She often pauses in these moments, resting her hands in her lap as she listens to the soft chorus of winter sounds. The wind hums gently against the cabin walls. Snow shifts in faint whispers as drifts settle and reshape themselves. Occasionally, distant branches creak under the weight of ice, producing a low, hollow note that echoes through the stillness. None of this is alarming. It is simply the nightly song of the frontier in winter. To pass the early hours of evening, she turns to quiet tasks that require neither speed nor force. Sometimes she writes a brief entry in a small journal, its pages thick and rough beneath her fingers. Her words are simple, often noting the weather, the health of the animals, or small triumphs. A loaf of bread that rose well, a tear in a glove neatly mended, a particularly peaceful afternoon. These notes are not meant for anyone else. They are a record of her own steady perseverance, a reminder that even slow days contain movement and meaning. Other evenings, she occupies herself with small crafts, braiding rope from leftover fibers, softening leather strips, or whittling a simple tool handle from a scrap of wood. The firelight reveals each curl of shavings as they fall softly to the floor. These activities hold a calming rhythm, allowing her thoughts to drift without urgency. Solitude, in winter, becomes not an emptiness, but a quiet space where the mind can wander gently, free from the pressing demands of warmer seasons. Before the deeper night arrives, she steps outside for one final round of chores. The cold meets her immediately, clear and sharp, but not unwelcome. Her breath rises in small clouds, dispersing quickly into the vast dark. The world beyond the cabin is softened by snow and dim light, appearing almost like a charcoal drawing. She moves slowly toward the barn, listening to the steady crunch of her boots across the frozen ground. The stars above are crisp and bright, scattered across the sky like tiny shards of glass. In the barn, the animals stir faintly at her arrival. She checks their water, making sure it has not frozen over completely. She adds fresh hay and ensures each creature is comfortable for the long night ahead. Their quiet presence offers a kind of companionship, a reminder that life persists even in the coldest months. The faint warmth of their breath, the soft rustle of straw, and the gentle tapping of hooves all blend into a peaceful, living stillness. Returning to the cabin, she closes the door firmly behind her, listening as the latch clicks softly into place. The sudden warmth feels deeper now, more enveloping after the cold outside. The fire glows steadily, casting long shadows that sway across the floor. She removes her outer layers, hanging them near the stove to dry. Each garment carries the scent of winter, cold air, faint frost, and the subtle earthiness of the barn. Dinner in the evening is simple, often leftovers warmed in a small pot or a piece of bread toasted lightly on the stove's edge. The quiet routine of eating alone is not lonely. It is a time of slow nourishment, a moment to appreciate the calm she has built within the cabin walls. Afterward, she tidies the space with deliberate motions, setting things in their proper places so the morning will begin smoothly. As the fire burns lower, she prepares for sleep. She shakes out her quilt, feeling its familiar weight, and smooths it across the bed. Before lying down, she spends a few moments simply watching the fire's embers pulse softly, their red glow ebbing and returning like a heartbeat. The room grows dimmer, the warmth more concentrated near the stove. Outside, the wind might lift for a moment, brushing against the cabin with a gentle sigh. In these last moments before rest, she reflects on the day not as a list of accomplishments, but as a quiet continuum of existence. Winter on the frontier demands resilience, yes, but also a capacity for stillness, an ability to find peace in repetition, strength in solitude, and meaning in the small, steady tasks that shape each day. When she finally settles beneath the quilt, the cabin seems to breathe with her, its wooden frame expanding and settling in a slow, rhythmic cadence. The fire flickers one last time before softening into a gentle glow. Wrapped in warmth, she closes her eyes, letting the calm darkness of winter night envelop her. The frontier, vast and silent, keeps its watch beyond the walls, and she drifts into sleep with the quiet assurance that tomorrow's rhythm will begin again, slow and steady as ever. Imagine now, as you continue drifting gently through this calm landscape of winter and stillness, that the story narrows its focus to a single woman. A woman whose quiet perseverance became a small but deeply human chapter in the vast history of the American frontier. Her name was Eleanor Hartwell, and though she was not a figure recorded in public memory or grand events, her winter alone on the homestead illustrates the resilience, routine, and soft strength that so many women carried through the coldest months of the year. Eleanor lived on a modest patch of land tucked along the edge of a distant pine forest. The nearest town lay several miles away, and the nearest neighbor even farther. Her homestead consisted of a cabin built with her husband during the warmer seasons, a small barn, a well, and a fenced patch of earth that served as their future garden. But the winter we focus on tonight was different because her husband had left in early November to seek work in a logging camp several days' travel away. Winter came sooner than expected, snow settling deeply along the roads, and he could not return until spring. Thus Eleanor found herself alone, facing a season known as unforgiving, yet approaching it with a quiet readiness shaped by years of preparation and an inner steadiness that came from accepting the rhythms of frontier life without complaint or panic. In the early weeks of winter, Eleanor kept herself busy with purposeful calm. She moved through her days with an awareness that every action, even the smallest one, contributed to her safety through the cold months. She gathered wood from the pile outside, paying attention to how quickly it shrank. She checked the roof for drifted snow, brushed it away when she could, and ensured the path between cabin and barn stayed passable. She wrapped extra quilts around the base of the cabin walls to soften the drafts. Her mornings often began with a slow descent into the silence of the day. She would stand at the cabin door for a brief moment, letting her eyes trace the white horizon, absorbing the stillness. The landscape was quiet but not empty. The subtle sounds of the woods carried through the air. A distant bird call, the shifting of frost on branches, the soft groan of the earth settling under snow. Eleanor found comfort in these sounds, for they reminded her that life endured even through winter's harshest hours. One of her more challenging tasks was tending the livestock. She kept 2 goats, several hens, and a mare named Hazel. Each required careful attention. Frozen water needed breaking. Feed had to be rationed wisely. The goats relied on warmth, so Eleanor lined their stall with fresh straw whenever she could. She ran her hands gently along Hazel's coat, checking for signs of stress caused by the cold. The mare would nuzzle her shoulder in response. The warm breath, a reminder that companionship on the frontier often came in simple, quiet forms. Eleanor kept records of everything, not in dramatic detail, but in soft, steady notes. How much candle wax remained, how many days' worth of oats were left, whether the temperature seemed to dip earlier or later than usual. Her journal became a map through winter, guiding her with calm awareness rather than fear. One gentle detail of Eleanor's personality was her love of small rituals. When the sun reached its highest point, which was not very high in winter, she would pause her work to sit by the cabin window. She placed a warm stone on the sill, heated earlier by the fire, and rested her hands upon it. This small gesture grounded her, offering warmth not only to her skin but to her thoughts. It became a symbolic reminder that warmth could be created, nurtured, and sustained even in the coldest season. And yet, the winter she faced was not without challenges. There were days when the snow fell in thick, unrelenting waves, obscuring the world into a pale haze. Eleanor would tighten her coat, pull up her hood, and move slowly through the drifts to check the animals or gather fallen branches from beneath sheltered trees. When storms came at night, the wind pressed hard against the cabin, creating long, low moans that echoed through the logs. She would sit by the fire during those nights, adding wood more often, watching the shadows dance along the walls. Her mind remained steady, her breath slow and deliberate. One particular evening, after a long day of storm winds, Eleanor discovered that one of the hens had taken ill. Winter illnesses spread easily among livestock, and she knew the hen's condition was likely beyond her skills. But she cared for the bird as best she could, wrapping it gently in cloth, placing it near the stove, speaking to it softly though she expected little. This quiet compassion was not unusual for frontier women, who often balanced the harshness of survival with small acts of tenderness that rarely made it into historical accounts. The hen did not survive the night, but Eleanor's response was calm. She stepped outside in the morning, dug a small hollow in the snow-covered earth, and laid the creature to rest with simple dignity. Then she moved on, continuing her chores without dramatization, yet with a subtle heaviness that winter often brings. Still, most days passed without crisis. They followed the rhythm she had grown familiar with: fire tending, animal care, small repairs, meal preparation, and moments of gentle reflection. She kept her mind engaged by reading from a worn book she had brought from her childhood home, a book of simple essays about nature and land. By firelight, she traced the words slowly, each sentence sinking into her thoughts like a calm tide. Eleanor's winter alone was not defined by loneliness as much as by presence, a grounded awareness of her tasks, her surroundings, and her own strength. She understood that winter survival on the frontier required softness as much as endurance. She approached each day with quiet competence and each night with thoughtful rest, embodying the steady resilience that history often overlooks. Her story, though simple, reflects the lived experience of countless women whose lives were shaped by winter's demands. And as we follow her journey further, we continue to drift through the calm landscape of her days, letting the pace of her world soothe us like the steady heartbeat of a distant past. As the season drifted steadily toward its coldest stretch, Eleanor found that the days began to merge gently into one another, forming a soft, unbroken ribbon of quiet routine. The early winter tasks she had approached with deliberate energy were now part of a rhythm so natural it felt almost like breathing. There was a comfort in this repetition, a sense that each small action, each log placed on the fire, each careful measure of grain, connected her to the long lineage of women who had endured deep winters before her. The nights grew longer in these mid-season weeks. The sun's arc shortened until daylight seemed like a short visit between long periods of darkness. Yet even this darkness carried its own tranquility. When Eleanor stepped outside in the evening, lantern in hand, the world appeared softened by the gentle glow of snow reflecting the faintest moonlight. The stillness of the air felt complete, as though the entire landscape had decided to rest alongside her. Each morning, Eleanor woke before dawn, guided more by the subtle intuition of time than by any external cue. She would rise from her quilted bed, stir the embers in the hearth, and coax the fire back to life with slow, practiced motions. The warmth expanded gradually, filling the cabin with a steady glow that softened the shadows along the wooden walls. Only once the fire settled into a consistent crackle did she begin the day's work. One of the most soothing routines she carried through deep winter was the tending of Hazel, her mare. The bond between woman and animal had grown stronger in these cold months, built through quiet interactions rather than dramatic moments. Eleanor brushed Hazel's coat with patient strokes, listening to the steady rhythm of the mare's breath. Sometimes Hazel's ears would flick forward as if acknowledging her, and Eleanor would respond with a gentle murmur, not expecting meaning but offering presence. The goats, hardy but sensitive to cold, required more careful attention now. Eleanor inspected their small shelter each day, reinforcing the walls with extra straw and patching thin areas with cloth scraps. She had learned over time that small adjustments could make a significant difference during cold spells. The goats rewarded her efforts with soft bleats and calm behavior, as if aware that their well-being depended on her steady hands. Inside the cabin, Eleanor expanded her daily rituals to help maintain her sense of groundedness. She took to grinding small amounts of dried herbs she had gathered in autumn, sage, yarrow, and a few remaining sprigs of mint. Though the herbs were not abundant, their fragrance brought warmth to the cabin's air, a gentle reminder of seasons that would eventually return. She placed the crushed herbs into a small bowl near the fire, letting the heat coax out their scent. This simple gesture created a subtle, comforting atmosphere that made the long days feel more inhabited. Another ritual that grew more important during deep winter was Eleanor's evening journaling. She wrote in slow, careful handwriting, not pressing too hard on the page, allowing the pencil to glide gently. Her entries remained factual and restrained, but sometimes she added small observations about the sky, the sound of the wind, or the unusual behavior of the animals. These modest reflections were not attempts at poetry or storytelling. They were simply markers, delicate notches along the timeline of her quiet winter. Occasionally, the deep winter silence was broken by the distant crack of a tree splitting in the cold. The sound echoed across the landscape like a reminder of nature's immense presence. Eleanor would pause in her chores when she heard it, listening for a moment to determine direction or distance, though she rarely acted on the sound. Splitting trees were common in harsh winter months, a natural adjustment to the intense cold. The storms that arrived during deep winter differed from the earlier ones. They moved slowly, often beginning with a quiet drift of powdery flakes before deepening into steady snowfall. Eleanor approached these storms with calm preparation. She carried additional firewood inside, ensured water buckets were filled, and placed extra feed within reach. When the snow thickened, she let the world outside fade into softness while she remained indoors, tending to small tasks or resting by the fire. During one such storm, the wind shifted sharply, creating a faint whistle along the cabin's eaves. Eleanor sat near the hearth, wrapped in a shawl, letting the sound blend into the night. She closed her eyes, breathing slowly, allowing the natural white noise of winter to settle her mind. The storm outside was neither threatening nor alarming. It was simply another presence, another pattern in the slow rhythm of the season. Despite her solitude, Eleanor seldom felt isolated. The winter offered her a sense of companionship through its constancy. Even the simplest elements, the way frost formed along the window each morning, or the gentle sound of Hazel shifting in her stall, felt like quiet reminders that life continued around her in small, steady ways. She appreciated this companionship, subtle though it was. And yet, there were moments when she missed the sound of another human voice. These moments were not sharp or painful. Instead, they appeared like a soft ache, the kind one experiences when remembering something tender from long ago. She would sit by the fire, hands wrapped around a warm cup, and imagine her husband journeying through his own winter landscape, hopefully safe and steady. She never lingered too long on worry. Worry, she believed, wasted energy needed for the tasks at hand. As deep winter progressed, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the passing of time with a calm clarity. She understood that winter demanded patience, but it also offered gifts, stillness, introspection, and a rare intimacy with one's own thoughts. These weeks allowed her to know herself more deeply, to recognize the enduring strength that lived quietly within her. Her winter alone was not marked by grand events or dramatic turns. Instead, it unfolded through subtle shifts, gentle tasks, and a steady awareness that each day carried her closer to spring. The small world she inhabited, her cabin, her animals, her routines, became a sanctuary shaped by her own care and constancy. And so, as the deep winter weeks continued, Eleanor moved through them with the same quiet resilience that had guided her since the season began, trusting that the rhythm she maintained as winter's long grip began to loosen. Eleanor noticed subtle changes in the landscape around her homestead. The snow, though still abundant, took on a different texture, a slightly softer sheen, the hard crust giving way in places to a gentle powder. These small shifts signaled the approach of spring, though it would be many weeks before the snow fully retreated. Even these early changes, barely perceptible to an untrained eye, offered Eleanor a quiet sense of anticipation and hope, a gentle promise that the rhythm of her days might soon alter again. She continued her routines, but with a mindful awareness that each action might need adjustment. Water troughs were easier to maintain now that temperatures occasionally hovered above freezing, though nights were still bitterly cold. The animals, too, sensed the changing season. Hazel seemed livelier, prancing with a subtle spring in her step, while the goats ventured closer to the edges of their shelter, curious about the softer snow and the faint, fresh scent of melting earth. Eleanor smiled quietly at these small signs, understanding that life, even in its harshest conditions, continued its cycles with patient, inevitable consistency. Eleanor's meals, though still simple, became slightly more varied. She found small reserves of winter vegetables that had survived in storage, and occasionally added a bit of dried fruit saved from autumn harvests. The act of preparing these meals remained slow and meditative. Each movement was deliberate, slicing, stirring, tasting, as though the preparation itself reinforced her connection to the land and to the continuity of life. She felt the satisfaction of small accomplishments, the subtle reassurance that her careful attention had kept her household intact through the coldest months. In the late afternoons, Eleanor often took walks around the perimeter of her homestead, even when snow still covered the ground in patches. The air was crisp but gentler than before, and the quiet crunch of snow beneath her boots became a familiar companion. She traced familiar paths to check fences, inspect the barn's roof, and observe the distant tree line. These walks offered not only practical oversight, but also a contemplative respite, a chance to breathe in the slowly changing world and reflect on the passage of time. She observed the faint brown of thawing earth, the small rivulets forming as ice melted, and the skeletal shapes of plants that would soon sprout anew. Evenings in late winter carried a lighter, more comforting glow. The fire in the cabin no longer needed to burn as fiercely to warm the interior. Eleanor would sit by it, sometimes simply watching the soft flicker of flames and embers, feeling their warmth seep into her bones. Occasionally, she allowed herself brief reveries about the life she would resume with her husband's return. She imagined tending the garden together, repairing fences, and preparing for the busier months ahead. These thoughts were gentle, more like distant horizons glimpsed through the winter haze than urgent plans demanding immediate action. Her journaling took on a reflective tone during these weeks. She recorded not only weather conditions and animal health, but also her observations of subtle seasonal changes. She noted how shadows lengthened in the late afternoons, how the wind's character softened, and how the light reflected differently across the snow. Her words were spare but evocative, capturing the quiet beauty and persistence of winter life rather than dramatizing hardship. Each entry became a gentle map of experience, connecting her inner world with the rhythms of the land. One morning, Eleanor noticed that one of her hens had begun to lay eggs again, a small but powerful sign of renewal. She handled the fragile shells carefully, grateful for this reminder that life persisted even in the harshest seasons. These small successes reinforced her sense of competence and continuity. Even when the days were long and quiet, she knew that her presence, attention, and steady care had ensured the survival of her home and her animals. Storms still came, though they were less frequent than in the early months of winter. When a snowstorm approached, Eleanor calmly carried out the same careful preparation she had learned over the season. She gathered additional wood, filled water containers, and checked on the animals. Each storm was absorbed into the rhythm she had developed, experienced not as fear or alarm, but as another element in the ongoing pattern of survival and quiet endurance. As the first truly mild days emerged, Eleanor allowed herself small moments of reflection. She marveled at the gradual transformation of her world, snow softening into patches of visible earth, icicles dripping slowly from the cabin eaves, the faint awakening of dormant plants beneath the frost. The long weeks of winter, marked by careful attention, steady work, and quiet perseverance, had shaped her understanding of endurance. She recognized that resilience was not always heroic or visible. It often took the form of repeated, measured actions performed without complaint, guided by patience and a subtle awareness of the world's rhythms. By the final weeks of winter, Eleanor's anticipation for spring blended seamlessly with the contentment she had cultivated during the cold months. She remained grounded in her routines, but began to plan small tasks for the upcoming thaw, patching a fence, preparing seed for the garden, and assessing the barn for any repairs needed after the season's weight of snow. These plans were gentle extensions of her habitual care, forward-looking yet unhurried, echoing the slow, measured rhythm she had maintained throughout the winter. In this way, Eleanor Hartwell's Winter Alone was both a story of survival and a quiet meditation on the human capacity for patience, presence, and resilience. Her days were not marked by dramatic events, but by continuous, deliberate engagement with the environment and its demands. The small, consistent actions of her hands and mind preserved life, comforted creatures, and created a sense of enduring stability. Her story reflects the lives of countless frontier women whose quiet strength shaped history in ways rarely recorded in official accounts. And so, as the last weeks of winter gave way to early signs of spring, Eleanor moved forward with a calm confidence. She had navigated the season alone, guided by the rhythm of routine, the care of her surroundings, and the quiet persistence that defined her life. In the gentle unfolding of time, she had not only survived, but had shaped a space of steady continuity and peaceful reflection, a testament to the enduring strength of ordinary lives in extraordinary conditions. Imagine yourself stepping beyond Eleanor Hartwell's cabin into the broader landscape of the frontier, where every mound, hollow, and snow-covered embankment carries stories that predate her presence. The land itself is a quiet archive, holding traces of those who came before, preserved in subtle impressions, discarded tools, or buried structures beneath layers of earth and ice. Archaeology, in this sense, becomes a gentle exploration of continuity, a way to touch the past softly, without urgency, without spectacle, and yet with quiet fascination. The frontier homestead was rarely the first occupation of a particular site. Indigenous peoples had lived on these lands for centuries, leaving behind evidence of their daily lives in stone tools, hearths, and storage pits. Occasionally, while clearing snow or repairing fences, Eleanor might have noticed fragments of pottery or a small, smooth stone sharpened into a tool. To her, these objects were curiosities, subtle markers that someone else had once walked here, cared for their own survival, and shaped the landscape in quiet, deliberate ways. Though she may not have understood the full significance, these remnants formed a silent dialogue across time. Snow, paradoxically, both conceals and preserves. Objects lost or discarded long ago might remain undisturbed under its soft blanket, hidden from casual view but protected from decay. Archaeologists, centuries later, would uncover these traces, revealing patterns of habitation, resource use, and adaptation to winter conditions. Imagine the careful hands of a modern researcher brushing away snow or frost, revealing a worn hearthstone or a fragment of cardwood. Each item tells a fragment of the story, connecting to Eleanor's lived experience in subtle, illuminating ways. Cultural practices of winter survival also leave delicate marks on the land. The placement of cabins, barns, and fences was rarely random. Builders considered prevailing winds, sun angles, and the proximity of water or wood. Eleanor's own choices reflected these same principles. Her cabin facing a slight southern exposure to catch what little sun warmed the winter. Her woodpile stored close to the stove entrance to reduce trips into the snow, and her fences positioned to protect animals from drifts and predators. These choices, repeated across homesteads, revealed a deep knowledge of place and season, knowledge that survives in measurements, layouts, and occasional written notes like Eleanor's journal. The winter months also shaped material culture in subtler ways. Thick quilts, layered clothing, and insulated boots were more than comfort. They were artifacts of survival skill. Items like these, when preserved, offer insights into the practical ingenuity of frontier women. Archaeologists studying recovered textiles or footwear note careful stitching patterns, reinforcement of pressure points, and adaptations to extreme cold. Eleanor's efforts to repair worn gloves or patch quilts would, in time, be recognized as part of a continuum of domestic creativity, an enduring link between necessity and artistry. Beyond physical objects, winter also preserved the intangible aspects of culture. Songs, whispered stories, and small rituals endured precisely because the long nights allowed for reflection. Eleanor may have hummed a simple tune while tending the fire, recited a phrase from memory, or repeated a routine gesture that connected her to her mother, her ancestors, or the broader traditions of homestead life. Such ephemeral acts, though invisible to archaeology, leave traces in diaries, letters, and oral histories, shaping our understanding of winter as a lived, sensory experience rather than a mere climatic condition. Occasionally, Eleanor encountered objects whose origin was mysterious. A small, carved stone at the edge of the clearing, or a fragment of pottery with unfamiliar patterns, invited curiosity and reflection. She might handle these items carefully, turning them over in her hands, noting their weight, texture, and color. Though their creators were long gone, Eleanor experienced a subtle communion with the past, a reminder that human presence endures even in the quietest, most isolated places. To her, these traces were less puzzles to solve than gentle echoes of other lives, other winters, softly layered beneath her own. Some archaeological insights also illuminate survival strategies during winter. Hearth locations, storage pits, and animal enclosures reveal how people managed resources, conserved heat, and protected food. Eleanor's own arrangements followed similar principles, guided by observation, necessity, and instinct. The convergence of her practices with earlier patterns demonstrates a continuity of adaptation, a quiet, almost meditative understanding of human ingenuity responding to environment, season, and isolation. In this way, the frontier homestead, while seemingly ordinary, becomes a site of layered histories. Each snowdrift may conceal centuries of human action. Each worn fence post echoes a lifetime of labor. Each patchwork quilt or repaired glove preserves not only material ingenuity, but also the rhythms and sensibilities of women who endured long winters alone. Archaeology, in its careful uncovering of these subtle signs, allows us to witness these lives indirectly, to appreciate the persistent ingenuity and calm endurance required to survive and even to flourish in isolation. As night descends and snow continues to blanket the land in silence, imagine Eleanor moving quietly through her homestead. Her hands adjust quilts, feed the animals, and tend the fire, while beneath her feet and around her, the traces of countless past occupants lie undisturbed. The land itself becomes a soft archive, a repository of human experience that transcends time. In this quiet, snow-laden world, the frontier's mysteries reveal themselves slowly, with subtlety, and without urgency. A perfect companion for a mind ready to drift gently toward rest. As the winter deepened and Eleanor's solitary days carried on, the landscape around her homestead whispered lessons that were subtle yet persistent. The frontier itself was more than a physical environment. It was a cultural archive, a living repository of knowledge embedded in tools, construction methods, and seasonal adaptations. Eleanor's experience, though personal and immediate, was part of this continuum, quietly shaped by generations who had navigated winter's demands before her. The cabins, fences, and barns scattered across the frontier were expressions of practical knowledge passed down through observation and imitation. Eleanor's own cabin reflected these principles. Logs carefully notched and stacked for insulation, a stone hearth positioned to maximize heat circulation, and small windows angled to capture the scarce sunlight. Every detail was the result of trial, error, and adjustment over time, demonstrating a rhythm of thought that bridged generations. Archaeologists today would study such structures to understand not only architecture, but also patterns of daily life. Yet Eleanor experienced them simply as guides for her survival. Food preservation was another window into the cultural fabric of winter life. Eleanor relied on dried grains, stored root vegetables, and preserved meat to carry her through months when fresh produce was unavailable. These methods were subtle yet ingenious. Grain stored in sealed sacks to prevent spoilage, root vegetables buried in insulated boxes or straw-lined pits, and dried meats carefully sliced and smoked over slow fires. Each technique was not arbitrary. It reflected centuries of human experimentation and observation. Eleanor's hands, performing these routines daily, became conduits of this cultural wisdom. Her slow, deliberate movements, a continuation of practices honed over time. The rhythms of Eleanor's days also reveal something less tangible: the psychological strategies necessary for enduring long winter months in isolation. Tasks were organized to minimize fatigue and maximize comfort. Even seemingly minor routines, tending the fire, filling water containers, or brushing down the animals, were imbued with a sense of order, offering reassurance and control over an otherwise unpredictable environment. Anthropologists might describe this as adaptive behavior, but Eleanor simply called it living sensibly, a calm response to circumstance, executed with care and patience. At times, Eleanor noticed the remnants of earlier settlers on the land. A carefully arranged stone circle marking a boundary, an old fence post-worn by decades of wind and snow, or a shallow pit containing discarded tools. These traces invited quiet reflection. She might pause to examine a rusted iron blade or a fragment of pottery, noting its weight, texture, and shape. The objects held no urgency, yet they spoke across generations. In touching them, Eleanor formed an unspoken connection with those who had endured winters before her, learning from their choices without words, through observation and empathy. Cultural artifacts extended beyond the material into the patterns of domestic life. Eleanor's habits, repairing quilts, patching clothing, maintaining her tools, mirrored centuries of frontier domestic skill. Each act was both practical and symbolic, representing the quiet ingenuity of women whose survival often relied on these understated talents. Her stitching, careful and methodical, aligned her not only with her own family traditions, but with broader practices that had sustained communities through countless winters. In this way, culture was embedded in action, in the repetition of tasks that were small individually, but cumulative in effect. Even the quiet sounds of winter conveyed lessons. The wind whistling through the trees, the soft crunch of snow beneath her boots, or the gentle breathing of animals in their stalls offered Eleanor subtle cues about weather, conditions, and safety. Listening became a skill, and attuning to the rhythms of the land provided both practical guidance and a soothing rhythm to her day. This attentiveness, passed down in practice if not written instruction, was itself a form of knowledge, one that required patience, observation, and respect for natural patterns. The objects, routines, and observations Eleanor engaged with during winter were all part of a cultural tapestry that merged survival with subtle artistry. Even the arrangement of firewood beside the stove or the careful layering of quilts on the bed reflected a deep understanding of comfort, efficiency, and resourcefulness. These small decisions, repeated daily, wove together a fabric of life that was as much about mindfulness as it was about survival. Through the lens of archaeology and cultural study, Eleanor's winter offers a quiet yet profound lesson. Survival in isolation is not solely a matter of enduring hardship, but of engaging fully with the environment, adapting wisely, and maintaining rituals that connect past, present, and future. Every step she took, every stitch she made, every observation of weather or animal behavior was part of a continuum that extended beyond her solitary experience, linking her to generations of people who had quietly shaped life in the winter frontier. As dusk settled over the snow-laden homestead, Eleanor paused for a moment to observe the landscape. Shadows lengthened across the drifts, and the faint light of evening glimmered on icicles hanging from the roof. She listened to the soft rustle of branches, the distant call of a bird, the subtle movement of her animals in their stalls. In these quiet moments, the frontier revealed itself not as an adversary, but as a teacher, offering lessons in patience, observation, and resilience, conveyed with gentle consistency rather than abrupt instruction. The winter itself, though severe, became a calm companion. Through careful attention, deliberate action, and quiet reflection, Eleanor had discovered a rhythm that allowed her to endure, to learn, and to connect with the cultural layers embedded in the land. In this slow, meditative existence, she exemplified a form of knowledge often overlooked in history. The understanding that survival is as much about patience, observation, and continuity as it is about physical endurance. And so, the deep winter unfolded around her, a landscape rich with quiet mysteries, subtle cultural imprints, and enduring lessons, all of which Eleanor Hartwell absorbed without haste, in the gentle rhythm of her days, preparing her mind and spirit for the eventual thaw, when spring would bring new challenges and new opportunities to weave her life into the broader story of the frontier. As the final weeks of winter stretched toward the first persistent thaws, Eleanor Hartwell's attention to the subtle signs of change became even more deliberate. The snow, once a solid, unyielding presence, began to shift under the warmth of longer days. Its surface softened, revealing small patches of frozen earth beneath, the promise of growth hidden under winter's lingering cover. Eleanor's awareness of these changes was both practical and contemplative, each shift in texture or hue a gentle reminder that time moved quietly but inexorably forward. Her daily routines, established over months of solitary winter, continued with quiet precision, yet Eleanor's mind was increasingly attuned to the patterns of life that extended beyond her immediate actions. She noticed how the thaw altered the behavior of the animals. Hazel stretched her legs more readily. The goats explored corners of their enclosure previously avoided, and even the hens seemed to anticipate the coming warmth, their movements more purposeful and alert. These observations, though subtle, offered Eleanor reassurance and a sense of continuity, connecting her present experience with the cycles of the seasons that had shaped life for generations. Beyond the practical, the thaw encouraged reflection on the cultural and human dimensions of survival. The frontier, though often thought of as stark or empty, was filled with traces of those who had come before. Small mounds where previous homesteads had stood, fragments of tools, or pottery etched with designs that spoke of domestic care and artistry. Eleanor had encountered some of these remnants throughout the winter, and now, in the clarity of the waning season, their significance became more apparent. Each object was a subtle communication across time, a reminder that the knowledge she relied upon had deep roots in the experience of countless others. She also recognized that the rhythm she had established, tending animals, preparing food, maintaining the cabin, journaling, and observing weather, was itself a form of culture. Anthropologists might later see it as adaptive behavior shaped by necessity. But to Eleanor, it was simply life unfolding with measured care. Each task was deliberate, executed with awareness and calm. In repairing quilts, patching gloves, or arranging firewood, she participated in a continuum of domestic skill, one that had quietly ensured survival on the frontier for centuries. Even the small rituals she had developed carried cultural weight. The way she hummed softly while feeding animals, the careful arrangement of utensils, the methodical layering of her bedding. These acts reinforced a sense of order, comfort, and continuity. They were subtle expressions of human resilience, transmitted through practice rather than instruction, and they shaped her perception of winter not as an adversary, but as a companion in patience and mindfulness. Eleanor's journaling also reflected this layered understanding. Her entries captured more than weather or resources. They noted the interplay of human activity with natural cycles, the quiet persistence of life in a frozen landscape, and the unspoken lessons embedded in daily survival. The pages of her journal were a testament not to heroic acts, but to thoughtful observation, careful action, and enduring presence. In reading them, one could trace not only her personal experience, but also the cultural knowledge that had been woven into frontier life for generations. During the final snowstorms of the season, Eleanor approached her tasks with both diligence and tranquility. She carried firewood carefully, checked the animal shelters, and made small repairs where needed, but there was a lighter quality to her movements. She had learned to anticipate challenges, to read the subtle signals of weather and landscape, and to integrate her daily work into a rhythm that minimized effort while maximizing safety and comfort. Winter, in its severity, had taught her efficiency, patience, and the value of quiet observation. By the time the first persistent warmth arrived, Eleanor could perceive the land's subtle transition toward spring. Icicles dripped steadily from the cabin eaves, small streams traced paths through melting snow, and patches of earth began to reveal the dormant shapes of plants. Her attentiveness during winter had not only ensured survival, but had also cultivated a deep appreciation for the cycles of life. Every observation, every careful action, was part of a continuum, linking her experience to the generations of frontier inhabitants who had preceded her and to those who would follow. As she paused at the threshold of her cabin one afternoon, looking over her homestead, Eleanor felt a quiet satisfaction. The winter had been long, solitary, and demanding, yet it had revealed the strength of her own routines, the subtle guidance of the land, and the richness of cultural continuity. The frontier, with its hidden traces of past lives, its enduring patterns of human adaptation, and its quiet lessons, had imparted knowledge not through instruction, but through experience. And she had received it with calm attentiveness, absorbing wisdom that was practical, enduring, and deeply human. In these final moments of winter, Eleanor's life and the land around her converged into a soft, meditative harmony. The lessons of survival, culture, and human continuity were not overt or dramatic. They were gentle, pervasive, and quietly profound. The frontier's winter, though harsh, had revealed itself as a landscape rich with insight, a patient teacher guiding her through months of quiet perseverance. And in this serene reflection, Eleanor exemplified the understated endurance, careful observation, and thoughtful rhythm that characterized frontier life, leaving a legacy of subtle knowledge embedded in the land itself. As the snow begins to retreat and the first hints of spring emerge, let us step back from the solitary life of Eleanor Hartwell to consider the broader social landscape of the frontier. Life on the frontier was not monolithic. While Eleanor's existence revolved around isolation, careful routines, and intimate interaction with her homestead, other inhabitants of the same region experienced winter differently, shaped by wealth, social status, and community networks. These contrasts reveal the diversity of daily life and the subtle ways culture and circumstance influence survival. Imagine a neighboring homestead, perhaps larger and more established, with extended family or hired hands. Here, the management of winter was a collective effort. Firewood might be plentiful, stacked in multiple cabins, and livestock tended by several hands. Meals could be more varied, including preserved foods gathered in larger quantities, salted meats, and a few imported staples. The household was a small microcosm of social organization, each member with assigned tasks that created a rhythm of activity far removed from the solitary diligence of Eleanor's days. This type of life was not necessarily easier in every sense. It required coordination, negotiation, and the management of interpersonal dynamics, all subtle pressures that shaped daily experience. In contrast to the modest interior of Eleanor's cabin, these wealthier homesteads could afford finer textiles, sturdier furniture, and multiple rooms insulated with extra layers of logs and boards. Even in winter, warmth could be distributed more evenly, and the presence of multiple fires reduced the constant labor of maintaining a single hearth. Such differences did not negate hardship. Snow and cold still pressed against walls, and isolation remained a reality in the broader landscape. Yet the contrast illustrates how material resources influenced both comfort and the types of daily attention required for survival. Within these households, women's roles often included supervising domestic labor, managing children, and coordinating food storage. Unlike Eleanor, who handled all tasks herself, a wealthier frontier woman might direct others in preparation of meals, care of animals, and maintenance of clothing and bedding. She still required careful planning and attention, but her experience involved more organization and delegation than the intimate, hands-on immersion Eleanor practiced. This division of labor shaped social norms and created a distinct rhythm of daily life, one structured as much by oversight and coordination as by physical exertion. The presence of visitors or neighbors also shaped social dynamics. In communities with greater density, winter brought opportunities for mutual aid, sharing firewood, exchanging food, or assisting with livestock during storms. These social networks were subtle but essential, creating an overlapping system of support that provided reassurance, reduced risk, and offered emotional connection. In comparison, Eleanor's solitary experience relied entirely on her own awareness and resilience, highlighting the varying degrees of social dependence and independence across frontier life. In a larger context, elite families or more prosperous homesteads occasionally possessed small libraries, musical instruments, or household decorations, all serving as reminders of distant cultural influences and aspirations. Evening routines might include reading aloud, playing simple music, or engaging in extended conversation, offering a psychological reprieve from winter's monotony. Eleanor, with only her journal and a modest book, cultivated her mind through observation and reflection rather than shared intellectual or artistic pursuits. The contrast is gentle but striking, illustrating the ways in which resources shape not only comfort but the texture of daily experience. Even survival strategies reflected these social distinctions. A wealthier homestead could afford multiple storage pits, thicker insulation, and larger quantities of food reserves, reducing daily physical labor and creating the possibility for intermittent rest or recreation. Eleanor, by necessity, spread her attention across all aspects of life, from tending the animals to preparing food, maintaining warmth, and repairing clothing, creating an intimate awareness of the interconnectedness of tasks. Both approaches demanded care, but the focus and intensity differed according to circumstance. Despite these contrasts, one notices a common thread. Winter demanded patience, planning, and attention, regardless of wealth or social position. The environment imposed a quiet discipline, and every household, solitary or communal, adapted through observation, routine, and methodical action. Even elite or extended households faced storms, freezing temperatures, and the slow passage of days. The difference lay not in the presence or absence of challenges, but in the scope and distribution of effort required to meet them. By examining these contrasts, we begin to appreciate the rich tapestry of frontier life. Eleanor's solitary endurance exemplifies intimate engagement with every facet of survival, while her neighbors' more social or materially endowed routines reflect collaboration and resource management at a larger scale. Both experiences offer insight into the diversity of winter life on the frontier, emphasizing the subtle interplay of environment, social structure, and cultural practice. The patterns, rhythms, and practices that emerge from these contrasts are not dramatic. They are quiet, cumulative, and deeply human. As you imagine these neighboring households, consider the gentle ways in which winter shaped interactions, choices, and daily routines. Each family or individual responded to the season's challenges through adaptation, reflection, and careful attention. In observing these differences, one can sense a broader narrative of frontier life, a story of endurance, resilience, and subtle social navigation, where comfort and labor, isolation and collaboration intersected in measured, predictable rhythms. And so, as the frontier winter slowly recedes, we see the quiet distinctions of human experience unfold. The solitary perseverance of Eleanor Hartwell, the coordinated domestic life of wealthier households, and the muted social interactions that connected neighbors in gentle, practical ways. Each life, shaped by its circumstances, reveals the patient intelligence and enduring adaptability that allowed frontier communities to survive and even flourish under the steady, measured pressures of winter. As winter stretched on across the frontier, households of varying means developed distinctive rhythms that shaped both survival and social interaction. In Eleanor Hartwell's homestead, the day revolved around intimate routines, tending animals, maintaining warmth, and observing the weather. In contrast, larger or more affluent households experienced a multiplicity of activity, with labor distributed among family members, neighbors, or hired hands. This contrast illustrates how social and economic status influenced not only comfort, but also the subtle texture of daily life. In wealthier households, mornings were often a coordinated affair. The household might awaken with the faint light of dawn filtering through multiple windows, and tasks would be allocated among the residents. While Eleanor rose alone, lighting the hearth and distributing feed herself, these homesteads relied on both planning and communication. Women oversaw kitchens, laundry, and clothing repair, while men or older children managed firewood, water, and livestock. Even in the coldest hours, work was shared, allowing for brief moments of conversation or observation, providing a quiet social rhythm alongside practical labor. Meal preparation reflected these differences. In larger households, food was produced and stored on a larger scale. Salted meats hung in smokehouses, root vegetables lined in insulated storage, and grains carefully rationed. Meals might be simple, yet the scale of effort permitted a measure of variety. Eleanor's own provisions were smaller, reliant on what she could manage alone. Yet, despite the differences, a unifying principle remained. Thoughtful management of resources was critical to survival, and repetition of routine offered comfort and structure. Both solitary and communal arrangements created their own forms of rhythm and security. Afternoons in wealthier homesteads often allowed small opportunities for reflection or leisure. Women might read letters, tend to sewing projects, or engage in quiet conversation while maintaining household oversight. Children learned practical skills under careful supervision, observing techniques passed down through generations. These moments of calm were embedded within a day otherwise structured around work, yet they offered a mental respite from the cold and isolation that defined frontier winter. Eleanor, while mostly alone, cultivated her own form of reflection through journaling, observation, and interaction with her animals, demonstrating that mindfulness and routine were not solely dependent on social networks. Winter also shaped communal obligations and cooperative activity. In neighborhoods or small clusters of homesteads, residents sometimes coordinated efforts to share firewood, tend to distant fields, or assist neighbors during storms. Such collaboration fostered both survival and gentle social cohesion. Eleanor, while more isolated, was not entirely disconnected. Occasional visits or the knowledge that other settlers were nearby created a subtle sense of shared endurance. Social structures, whether immediate or peripheral, influenced not only material well-being, but also emotional resilience. Elite households, though better equipped materially, still faced subtle hardships that tested management and attention. Winter storms, frozen water sources, or animal illness required vigilance and careful planning. Even when physical labor was shared or mitigated through resources, decision-making and oversight fell heavily on the heads of household members, often women. Their leadership was quiet but essential, ensuring that labor, resources, and safety were aligned in a consistent rhythm. In this way, winter required both solitary endurance and the capacity for coordinated management, illustrating the interplay between material advantage and sustained attention. The interior of wealthier homes reflected both practicality and aspiration. Sturdier walls, multiple rooms, and better insulation created relative comfort, yet they also demanded continuous care. Fires tended, windows maintained, and storage monitored. Textiles, quilts, and layered clothing were abundant, but required maintenance, while kitchens and pantries needed constant attention to prevent spoilage. These acts, though less physically exhaustive than Eleanor's solitary tasks, still represented a quiet mastery over the environment, a blend of labor, observation, and foresight. Even with differences in wealth and social structure, the frontier imposed a common discipline, attention to cycles, patterns, and minute changes. The sun's arc, the subtle warming of late winter days, the behavior of animals, and the appearance of melting snow all required observation. Both Eleanor and her wealthier neighbors depended on careful monitoring of their surroundings. In the wealthier homestead, tasks might be divided or delegated. In Eleanor's cabin, every action was her own responsibility. Yet in both cases, rhythm, awareness, and patience guided survival. By considering these contrasts, we gain a deeper understanding of frontier winter life. Eleanor's solitary endurance highlights intimate engagement with every element of daily existence, while larger households illustrate distributed labor, resource management, and subtle social coordination. Both experiences reveal human resilience, patience, and adaptation to environmental pressures, emphasizing that survival is not merely physical effort, but the result of observation, planning, and the maintenance of calm, consistent routines. As evening settled over the snow-blanketed frontier, imagine Eleanor finishing her tasks, while nearby, families gather quietly around fires, attending to animals, food stores, or small domestic projects. Across this landscape, diverse experiences converge in shared principles: measured labor, careful attention, and the gentle orchestration of life to meet the season's challenges. Winter, though formidable, shaped human activity in ways that were subtle, persistent, and deeply instructive, offering lessons in endurance and the quiet intelligence embedded in routine. In reflecting on these contrasts, the frontier emerges as a landscape of diversity and continuity. Solitary and communal, simple and resourceful, each household navigated winter through a balance of observation, preparation, and deliberate action. The variations in daily life reveal not only the influence of social and economic status, but also the common threads that bound frontier inhabitants: patience, attentiveness, and the persistent, gentle rhythm of survival. As winter gradually yielded to the first persistent warmth of spring, the frontier landscape transformed before Eleanor Hartwell's eyes. The hard crust of snow softened, rivulets of melted ice traced quiet paths across the homestead, and the skeletal shapes of plants hinted at life soon to re-emerge. Across the frontier, households of every size and circumstance experienced these changes, yet each in its own rhythm. Some solitary, some communal, some shaped by wealth, others by necessity. In these contrasts, we can perceive not only the diversity of experience, but the continuity that links all human lives on the frontier. Eleanor's own routines, refined over months of solitary winter, continued with subtle adjustments. Water sources were easier to manage, animals ventured more freely, and the interior of her cabin required less constant attention. Yet the lessons of winter remained embedded in every task. Her attentiveness, patience, and methodical care had preserved life and comfort, while also cultivating a sense of presence and quiet reflection. Each action, however small, had been a thread woven into the larger tapestry of survival, linking her to both the land and the generations of settlers who preceded her. Nearby, more prosperous or social households experienced the thaw differently. Tasks previously shared across multiple hands or delegated to children became more manageable. Snow that had impeded travel now cleared, allowing neighbors to visit, exchange resources, or assist with chores. These subtle interactions reinforced social bonds and nurtured community resilience. Even as Eleanor maintained her solitary rhythm, she remained part of this broader network, however indirectly, connected by the shared experience of enduring and responding to winter's challenges. The thaw also revealed the physical traces of cultural and practical knowledge embedded in the land. Animal paths became visible once more. Fences marked property boundaries, and remnants of previous homesteads or indigenous presence emerged along the edges of fields. Eleanor, attuned through months of observation, recognized these markers as quiet testimonies of human adaptation and ingenuity. Each artifact, structure, or footprint told a story of planning, labor, and careful attention. Stories she had lived herself in parallel through her routines, repairs, and observations. Within her own homestead, Eleanor noted how seasonal adjustments subtly shaped life. Storage pits were inspected, shelters repaired, and firewood replenished in preparation for the next winter. She reviewed her journal, reading entries that recorded daily tasks, observations of weather and animal behavior, and reflections on the passing weeks. These records were practical, but they also provided a form of gentle meditation, allowing her to trace the rhythms of her own endurance and the quiet intelligence embedded in habitual care. The contrast between solitary and communal winter life remained evident. Eleanor's experience emphasized intimacy with each detail of survival, fostering independence and deep familiarity with the land. Larger households, by contrast, demonstrated coordination, delegation, and shared responsibility, illustrating the ways human communities adapt to environmental pressure collectively. Both forms of life demanded resilience, attentiveness, and resourcefulness, yet each achieved continuity and comfort in distinct ways. Observing these differences invites reflection on the subtle interplay between circumstance, skill, and social structure that shaped frontier existence. As the snow receded, the land itself seemed to exhale after months of frozen quiet. Birds returned, tentative and unhurried, and distant streams began to flow with the weight of melting ice. Eleanor's gaze swept across her homestead and neighboring properties, noting the gentle reawakening of life. She recognized that winter, though long and arduous, had imparted not only practical lessons, but also a contemplative rhythm, teaching her to move deliberately, observe keenly, and value both the immediate and extended networks of survival. Evenings now held a different cadence. Fires burned with less intensity. Shadows fell differently across the cabin walls, and Eleanor could sit with her journal open, observing subtle changes in the light and temperature. The quiet knowledge of the winter months remained with her. The value of steady routines, the importance of careful observation, and the profound resilience inherent in both solitary and communal effort. These insights, though understated, formed the core of frontier wisdom, a patient, enduring intelligence that shaped daily life long after the snow had vanished. In the broader panorama of frontier life, the end of winter illustrated continuity across households of all types. Eleanor's solitary diligence, the coordinated efforts of wealthier families, and the interactions of neighbors all reflected a shared reliance on attentiveness, careful management, and respect for seasonal cycles. These patterns, though varying in expression, were rooted in the same principle. Life on the frontier demanded patience, observation, and the consistent application of knowledge, whether material, social, or cultural. As the sun rose higher and the snow gradually melted, Eleanor prepared for the coming spring, confident in the foundation she had maintained. Her homestead, animals, and personal routines were intact, reflecting months of deliberate effort and quiet attentiveness. Around her, neighboring households adjusted to the changing season, each guided by their own rhythms, skills, and social networks. In this serene transition, the frontier revealed itself not as a site of drama or spectacle, but as a landscape shaped by subtle, persistent human action. A landscape where ordinary lives, carefully lived, create enduring continuity and quiet mastery of place. In these concluding moments of winter, the frontier offers a gentle lesson. Endurance is cultivated through deliberate attention, observation, and routine. Comfort emerges from careful adaptation. And culture, whether solitary or communal, is expressed in the rhythm of everyday life. Eleanor's experience, mirrored and contrasted by neighboring households, underscores the quiet intelligence of human survival, the subtle artistry of domestic skill, and the enduring value of measured, mindful engagement with the environment. And as the season turns, life begins anew, informed by the gentle, persistent lessons of winter. As we draw our journey across the frontier to a close, imagine the soft thaw of snow, the gentle murmur of streams returning, and the first tender green pushing through the winter-hardened earth. Eleanor Hartwell's solitary winter, rich with routine, observation, and quiet resilience, now meets the broader landscape of frontier life. Neighbors tending animals, families coordinating meals, and communities sustaining each other in subtle, enduring ways. Across these experiences, one thread remains constant: patience, attentiveness, and the quiet art of living deliberately shape survival and comfort alike. In reflection, Eleanor's days remind us that endurance is not always dramatic. It is found in the careful tending of animals, the slow repair of a quilt, the watchful eye on a snow-covered field, and the gentle rhythms of thought, observation, and action. Even amidst isolation, she discovered connection to the land, to animals, to the passing seasons, and to the traces of those who came before. These connections, though quiet and unassuming, form a network of subtle knowledge, bridging past and present, self and environment. The frontier, in its contrasts, offers gentle perspective. While solitary diligence shaped Eleanor's experience, communal and more affluent households reveal variations of social rhythm, coordination, and shared labor. Each approach highlights the human capacity to adapt, to organize, and to cultivate comfort and continuity, whether through careful personal effort or collective care. Observing these differences invites us to appreciate the subtle intelligence embedded in ordinary lives and the patient rhythm that sustains them. As you imagine the first warmth of spring reaching her homestead, consider the gentle lessons left behind by these months of quiet winter life. The value of patience, the strength inherent in consistent attention, and the comfort that emerges when daily actions are guided by mindfulness and care. Eleanor's story, mirrored by the broader frontier community, illustrates that even the most ordinary days contain profound insight, and that life, lived deliberately, can foster both resilience and reflection. Before we part, take a deep breath and let your mind linger on the soft light across snow-melted fields, the gentle rustle of branches, the warmth of the cabin hearth, and the calm rhythms of frontier life. Know that these stories, though quiet, ordinary, and gentle, have carried a deeper purpose: to invite reflection, soothe the mind, and offer companionship in the stillness of winter's passing. Thank you for journeying with me, the sleepy historian, through the enduring quiet of frontier winters. If this soft, reflective storytelling has brought you peace, feel free to like this video and subscribe, but only if it genuinely helps you rest. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is, as it's comforting to imagine others, far and near, falling asleep to these gentle tales. And now, with the land awakening and our stories softly concluded, let the warmth of reflection guide you into rest, leaving the frontier in its calm, enduring rhythm.